Hello, hello. Welcome back yet again for another Concealed Carry podcast episode. And as you can see, I have a special somebody with me here, Mr. Charlie Perez, Big Panda Performance, the big man himself.
Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, buddy. Let's see. Let's see who's the first to join and the first to comment. Let's see. Who do we got? I see the notifications have come through. That's always a good sign. I mean, stuff's working. Mark Okniansky, first commenter. Whoa, a third episode in one day? Yes, bonus episode. So what Charlie doesn't know is that, yes, in fact, I am doing 3 episodes today where normally I would have done 2 because Wednesdays are my podcast day.
Yeah.
But I am getting a little ahead of things by doing this one with you tonight. So I will not do 2 episodes next week because a week from today is number 1, my son's birthday, one of my sons. And number 2, as soon as that's done and he's in bed and asleep, I hit the road to go to Area 2.
Wow. I'm going there too.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
You're probably not driving though.
I am actually.
Oh, you are.
Yeah, the the whole flight thing and rental car thing is just it's too crazy.
Rental
That and
cars
it's
are.
not that bad of a drive for us coming from Colorado down to Arizona.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, for me. That's pretty much what it comes down to as well. As the whole rental car expense is a bit ridiculous right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think they're trying to make all those profits they lost out on when everything was shut down.
Yeah. So anyway, we're doing 3 episodes today and only 1 next week, which will be an earlier episode next week. It'll be it'll be our normal 1 p.m. Mountain Time episode. It'll probably be me and Matthew Marister, and we'll do that. And then, like I said, I'm trying to free myself up to spend a little bit of time that afternoon and evening with my family and my son on his birthday, and then I got to make sure I'm ready to go to Arizona. So
Cool.
Yeah, 3 times the fun. Yes. All right. Well, we got at least 28 of you, 31 now watching. Very cool. Very cool. Let's go ahead and begin now the recorded portion of the audio show at this time. You ready, Charlie?
Yes, sir.
So, in 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 4, Episode 11. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network, brought to you by XS Sites. Today is Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021, as of the recording of this episode. And I'm your host, Riley Bowman. And today, because he's back yet again with us, he is hereby promoted to special honorary co-host, and that is Charlie Perez of Big Panda Performance.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to another podcast of chock full of entertainment and knowledge.
Yes, indeed. Entertainment and knowledge. I like that. Now, with this promotion, Charlie, to special honorary co-host extraordinaire, there's responsibilities that come with that. So just I'm putting you on notice.
Yeah, bring it on, baby.
We've got a little special something for you all. In fact, I'm going to let you know right here, right now. Charlie has graciously proposed that we give away 2 copies of his book. You got a copy of it there?
I got one right here.
There it is. 2 copies of Path of Focused Effort, which is a great book. If you want to learn how to shoot and shoot better, you should read that book. So Charlie's going to give away 2 copies to 2 lucky viewers this evening. So I know this will leave some of you podcast listening only folks out. I apologize for that, but that's the way Charlie decided we're going to go about it. So because we're hoping to have some good interaction with you folks online tonight. So stay tuned, because you tell me if I'm wrong, if we need to switch it up, Charlie, but we're going to give away 1 copy to Charlie's going to be the judge. one copy to the person that asks what Charlie deems the best question of the evening, and one copy to the person he deems asked the worst question.
Yeah, that'll give us a good mixture of people trying to earn the best question or earn the worst question.
So you decide if you want to be known for he who won a copy of Charlie's book by asking the best question or the worst question. Hopefully nobody gets too offended because they thought they were asking a good question and Charlie decided it was the worst.
Wow.
Okay. Or it could just be that Charlie's going to give two lucky winners that asked good questions a copy of his book. That could be too.
Whatever we got to do, as long as it's engaging and entertaining and people learn stuff, I think that's the important part.
Excellent. Guys, before we get into tonight's topic, which, by the way, is going to be how to achieve maximum cold performance, okay, which I think is a fantastic topic that Charlie came up with all on his own. That big head of his, a big brain. Because here's the thing, Charlie is best known for his competitive shooting performance, okay, which he is very, very good at. I just returned from limited nationals as the 7th place best in the country, in limited. So, which is a phenomenal thing. I mean, that's a high bar to even be in the top 10. Sometimes even the top 20 is a pretty phenomenal feat for a lot of folks. So Charlie was the 7th place finisher at limited nationals just a couple weeks ago. We're proud of him for his accomplishments there, but that's what he's best known for. But here's the thing, whether you're a competitive shooter, right, or a defensive shooter, cold performance is still important, because as a competition shooter, you want to perform your best all the time because you want to win.
Absolutely.
As a defensive shooter, you only got one chance to make it count. So cold performance is all you've got. So I think this is going to be an awesome topic to talk about tonight. Tonight's episode is, first of all, honorarily sponsored by Big Panda Performance. So you can head over to Charlie's website, bigpandaperformance.com, to see what he's all about, and also order yourself a copy of his book if you would like to get one. Also, tonight's episode sponsored by XS Sights, who many of you know is the title sponsor of our podcast. XS Sights is, I mean, you hear me probably say it so often that you're sick of hearing about it, but guys, they're awesome people, good people working a humble job based in Texas, making their sights all in-house. Okay. They even do, for the night sights that they offer, they have the licensing and everything in place to manufacture their own tritium vials, or whatever you call them, that are inserted into the sight. That's actually a really difficult thing to get to as a sight manufacturer, is to be able to handle radioactive material to actually make those night sights. That's how much they care about making a quality product in-house by American workers in their home state of Texas. So check out xssights.com. I highly encourage that you do so. Tonight's other episode sponsor is the Elite Survival Systems. Well, it is Elite Survival Systems, and highlighting their, I got it right here, their Stealth SBR backpack, which I had to get my hands on because I'll tell you, the thing that attracted me to this bag is that it's very non-tactical looking. It just kind of looks like a backpack. In fact, I'm gonna just go to my screen here so you can see this a little better. It's just it's got some decent styling to it. I'll tell you, it's made really, really nice, high quality. I mean, it's gonna last a long time. The materials are top notch. The zippers are top notch. They're very smooth. They work very, very well. And that's really important because this is a bag that's designed to quickly access something like, oh, ho, ho, look at that, some hardware. So I've got a little 300 blackout pistol in there with a law tactical folder that fits. And I'll tell you, I was a little bit worried this bag was going to be really huge. It probably looks huge in the camera there, but if I hold it back here closer to my body, you'll see it's a pretty normal looking backpack. Awesome. I've been really impressed with it, and I look forward to rolling out with my Stealth SBR backpack from Elite Survival Systems. Proud to have them on as a new sponsor of the podcast. So check them out. EliteSurvival.com is their website.
So can I ask you a question about that
Absolutely.
backpack? It looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
So do they have like dedicated like Velcro straps or something like that on the inside to kind of retain the firearm in a specific place?
Yeah, and it's hard for me to show it on camera, and I know for those that are only listening to the podcast, you can't see it at all. But what you'll see is, it's held
totally
in that
retained,
bag.
yeah.
So we've got a strapping system of sorts. I don't know, it's a real technical term, but basically there's a strap here that's holding the top part of it. There's like a little pouch that the bottom goes into. There's a lot of different mounting points that you could also fashion up some other straps or whatever, if you had and you can customize and move everything around in this bag. This other side of the panel is Velcro MOLLE straps, or it's a MOLLE panel. So I'm actually planning on putting one of our Mountain Man Medical trauma kits. And
not like sandwiches and stuff, like candy bars and sandwiches.
Charlie knows what's important.
Yeah, and you got to have the food.
So it's a really cool adaptable bag that if you want to carry a little bit more impressive firepower in a discreet manner. I'm going to go on a road trip to Arizona. Well, hey, I'm going to throw my Stealth SBR backpack in the truck and roll out. So pretty cool setup without drawing unnecessary looky-loos your way. So yeah, other questions?
No, that looks pretty cool.
Yeah. Mark is asking if the bag will fit a Tavor. No, that's a little bit bigger of a setup. So that short-barreled 300 Blackout pistol that's in that bag is a 9-inch barrel. And if you're familiar with how long an AR-15 receiver is, so that plus 9 inches, and then I still have to have the folding adapter for the stock to be able to fit all that in there. And that's about as small as you can go and get decent performance out of a 300 Blackout. So, and anything bigger than that, like you could probably fit, I think you could probably squeeze a 10.5-inch barreled gun in there that had a folding adapter stock. But a Tavor, no way. Even though they're relatively short with their bullpup design, they're still like 30-ish inches long, 31 probably. So not going to happen. Anyway, all right. So told you I have a great topic for you tonight. Okay, achieving maximum cold performance. Charlie's definitely got some thoughts on that because it's something that Charlie's very good at, especially compared to me. I look at a lot of the matches I shoot, Charlie, and by the way, folks, we'll talk quite a bit tonight from the perspective of shooting matches, and that's a relevant thing because shooting competitive matches is a stressful event. All right, those of you that remember Matt Little being on my podcast, and Matt has legit real world experience hunting and shooting and capturing bad guys. And you may remember that Matt said on my podcast that for him, shooting a USPSA match, especially early on when he was getting into it, was way more stressful than getting into a gunfight. And that's like,
well, yeah, because you know it's coming.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So the fact of the matter is, shooting matches is a stressful event that it's difficult to achieve your best performance because of that, because it's really easy for us to mentally get in our own way, to be nervous, to get the shakes, to get, to have anxiety, to worrying about results and outcomes, and thereby looking past the processes that get us to those outcomes. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities for us to be tested in our performance in a competitive shooting match. So, and I realize that still doesn't completely fully translate over to real life defensive, situation of some kind. However, our desire is the same thing, which is get our best performance that we can with the very first shot that's fired, because failure to do so in a match might cost us the match. And for some people, high level shooters like Charlie especially, that's stressful in and of itself when you realize you did not perform as well as you wanted to, or as well as you should. But in the life or death situation, you might only get the one chance, and so you've really got to step up and perform right from the get-go. So where would you suggest that we start with this discussion, Charlie? And just, how where do we begin with getting our best performance right from a cold start?
Well, so maybe you probably explained this to your listeners before, like what kind of the game of practical shooting is, especially like USPSA or IDPA or IPSC or whatnot. Basically, you're in a scenario where you're on the range for 3 to 6 hours, and you have maybe a grand total of 2 minutes of shooting
Yep.
across multiple different stages. And the game is set up in a manner where you're afforded a certain amount of time before you actually shoot the stage to physically and visually inspect the stage of the course of fire. So you can, quote unquote, dry fire or dry practice that stage with your hands and moving around the stage, that kind of thing. But you absolutely can't, draw your gun or point like any kind of aiming device at targets and that kind of thing. So in each stage, you only get to shoot once, right? And that one time you get to shoot it is your score. So even though you got a gun on your hip all day and you're on the range all day and you're shooting multiple stages every day, you're essentially in a scenario where you're performing, quote unquote, cold on every stage. It's not like you get to have a bunch of warm-up shots or a bunch of practice, before an actual shooting before you get to actually shoot the stage. Like, a good comparison is probably like you've probably seen like boxers warm up, before they get in the ring, right? They're like doing a pretty serious like workout and shadow boxing and that kind of stuff, and getting, sparring with partners and that kind of stuff before they get in the ring and it goes ding and they got to perform. Like that's a totally different scenario. So I think that's actually one of the important tenets around the quote unquote practical part of practical shooting is that you're forced in a scenario where you have to perform when you're not warmed up, when you're not practiced up in that manner of, okay, I've just shot 200 rounds now, let me shoot these next 30 rounds for score. Like that just doesn't happen. So you have to deploy a match engagement methodology that affords you the opportunity to basically live fire the stage in a dry fire scenario that replicates that live fire scenario as realistic as possible. That way, when you actually perform the stage in live fire, that it isn't this unknown weird thing that you only get to do once. It's actually like if you practice it effectively in dry practice, either physically or mentally, mentally visualizing your performance at a realistic pace and all that good stuff, then it really does serve as an iteration of live firing the stage. And in the practical shooting sports, like a lot of people, like in USPSA, for example, you're afforded the opportunity to figure out your own strategy for the stage. And most stages offer many different decisions on like path of movement through a stage or order of engagement of targets or that kind of thing. Like where am I going to do my reloads and where am I going to run first or second or third? Or maybe there's like some more complex activated targets and what is the sequence I need to shoot these activated targets in the most efficient manner and that kind of thing. And so a lot of competitors feel like if they come up with a strategy, like how am I going to do it, that equates to the programming of that process, which is a completely different effort. Like, and I explain that in my book, Path of Focus Effort, that it's really, there's two completely different efforts. One is the strategy effort of figuring out what is the most efficient path or manner of tackling the shooting challenge. And then after you figure out your strategy and you decide on a strategy, then you can deploy that in a manner of programming that performance. And the better you program the performance, the more you can execute on a subconscious level. And performing anything at a subconscious level obviously requires a tremendous amount of practice, right? And like a common correlation is like driving your car. Like when you first got your license and you're first driving a car, everything is unique. You're consciously thinking about where are my feet, where are my hands, where am I at in the lane, am I using my turn signals, am I in the right gear, and all that good stuff. Whereas you do that for a certain amount of time, then changing gears, like if you're driving a manual, changing gears or running the clutch, that just becomes second nature, quote unquote. It's subconscious, right? Or using your turn signal when you're going to change lanes, or looking in your blind spot when you're going to change lanes. Those things that you do independently, subconsciously, frees up your conscious mind to deal with other things, right? And that same methodology applies to the practical shooting sports. The more I can practice skills to a subconscious level, I can rely on that autopilot, the subconscious autopilot, to get that stuff done. So that also dramatically simplifies my stage programming effort, right? Like a good example would be if I'm putting myself in a shooting position properly in the proper location, then the targets are going to get shot in the most efficient manner that my subconscious feels is good enough. So at my skill level where I'm at, I don't have to program, well, I'm going to come in this position and I'm going to shoot this target first and that one second and that one third, that kind of thing. Like I've done enough iterations of those same, pretty much all the different arrays to know that the most important thing is if I put myself in the shooting position properly to access all the targets in a very efficient and structured manner, that they're going to get shot as quickly and efficiently as possible. So it's what I like. The advice of a programming effort that I'd give a C or B class shooter would be different than a master or a grandmaster shooter, because those two different skill levels of shooters, they have different quantities of skills that they've practiced to a subconscious level. But overall, I think that the predominant theme that is a log jam for a lot of people or competitors in practical shooting sports, or even in a concealed carry scenario, is that it's the more you can mitigate distractions, the better. Because distractions and things that happen that you don't expect, whether that's manufactured distractions or distractions that are outside of your control, when we have to deal with those distractions consciously, right? And the more mental bandwidth that we have, because we're allotting or allowing our subconscious to do those very fundamental skills, that opens up more bandwidth, conscious bandwidth, to deal with those distractions. But it's kind of like making your bed, right? If you don't make your bed and the next evening you go and get in your bed, it's like, well, where's my pillows and where's my sheets, and I got to rearrange everything before I can even get in bed, right? Well, to mitigate that distraction at the end of the day, you can make your bed when you get up in the morning, right? And that same kind of process applies to very basic stuff, like making sure your gun is clean, right? Are you servicing your gun in a reliable manner? Does it function reliably? Are you using ammunition that's reliable, right? Are you, did you get enough sleep the night before, right? Should you not go to an event because you have other things going on in your life that are distracting you while you're at the event? Like all of those things serve as distractions, and the more that you can mitigate those things, the better. Well, that was a really long intro, but hopefully that provides some ground, level of being able to kind of set up the foundation of being able to perform cold.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, because there's a lot of truth in what you said there. And a big piece of that is the more stuff that we can be subconsciously competent with, mean, it's like what you said. You've practiced enough, you've shot enough, you've done enough of your respective, competitive activity that there's certain things you no longer have to really think about. It just happens because it's a subconscious level of competence, and so the more we can do that with just about anything, the more it frees up mental bandwidth and processing. I like to talk about it in the defensive context of the more competent I am at handling the tool, whatever that tool is, and a lot of us think in terms of the gun, but it could be pepper spray, it could be a knife, it could be all kinds of things, even pure hand-to-hand combative type, techniques. The more competent I am with whatever the tool is, the more I can focus on the actual problem that's before me. It's like, the better we are at driving, the less we actually think about the driving, and we simply just do the thing. Like, the brain is the hand, is the foot, is the gas pedal and the steering wheel, and ultimately the car. Like, the brain is the car, and the car simply becomes an extension of that. I, that's one of my big motivating drivers in pursuing excellence in competitive shooting, is that I've desired to get to where handling, and arguably I would say that I'm probably at a level where handling a gun and shooting a gun is pretty, it's at a competent level enough that I could probably do a lot of things automatically. But now I enjoy it well enough that I want to keep going and keep excelling. But the more that you become competent in those skills, then the more the gun or the tool or whatever is just an extension of you, the actual person, and the brain. And like, that's a wonderful place to be. Part of that is that you learn and discover where your limitations are, your own personal limitations are, and there's a certain level of confidence, I think, that comes with that. Like,
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to cut you off, but
go ahead.
I think that there's with any kind of, we need to practice the game that we play, and there's a lot of people that take that way out of context, right? They When they go out and they live fire practice, they only live fire,
Hmm.
right? They're there at the range. They drove however many miles it takes to get to the range, and they brought their 500 rounds, and that's their goal, is to shoot those 500 rounds.
Yep.
And there's no, in those competitors' brains, taking the time while you're on the range to not live fire is like abnormal to their thought process, because they're like, hey, I drove all the way out here and I spent all this time and all this whatever to come out here to shoot. Well, the reality is that there are absolutely certain skills that we have to shoot a tremendous amount of ammunition to learn, right?
Hmm.
Trigger control, grip, gun handling stuff, those, like, there are absolutely skills that the gun needs to go boom to learn that stuff. But at some point, you got to accept the fact that, okay, my trigger manipulation skills are good enough. Okay, now I have to train the skill of actually performing cold, meaning I'm going to go to the range. And one of the things that I like to do when I go to the range is I like to set up either a stage or a section of a stage, and then I'll set the whole thing up like as if I was attending a match and helping set up a match. Pull all the props out of the barn, set it all up, staple up targets, do it as legit as possible to replicate that. Hey, I just worked out and pounded a bunch of nails, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Hauled a bunch of walls, that kind of situation. And then I'll mimic the exact same scenario I'm exposed to in a match, meaning I'll walk the stage, figure out where are all the targets, what are my options, strategy wise, figure out the strategy of the stage. Once I figure out the strategy of the stage, then I'll program that stage. And the programming effort could be multiple iterations of a physical dry fire of it, and absolutely multiple iterations of a mental rehearsal of it, right?
Yep.
And then once I feel like I've physically and mentally rehearsed the stage enough, then I will shoot the stage live fire. I'll unload and show clear, reholster, and then I'll go score the targets. I'll tape all the targets. I'll paint all the steel. I will reset that stage as if it was a normal match, and then I'll restart that whole process. I'll assess what I felt like I did good or bad or otherwise. Then I'll start to work on those different sections or components of the stage where I felt like I didn't perform as I should. And then I, dry fire wise or dry practice wise, work on those elements until I feel like I have hammered out those issues. And then once I feel like enough iterations of relearning or figuring out that section of the stage is done, then I will live fire it again for that one additional time. And usually the frequency between shooting in that scenario for me is about 15 or 20 minutes. And when I tell people I don't shoot, my frequency of shooting is very long in duration compared to most other people. Like I can be on the range for 4 to 6 hours and shoot 100 rounds, and that explodes people's brains because they're like, well, how, like, what were you doing? Were you screwing around? Like, no, that whole time I'm working at it, but the bulk of my work effort is in dry fire because that is the skill test that I need to hone to perform cold in a match, because I'm honing that skill of how do I maximize and optimize my performance when my only tool in the bag to hone that performance is dry practice, right? So that that to me is the big piece that a lot of people are missing in their practice scenarios, is when you go out in live fire, go out to the range, I should say, you need to have a good mixture of, not, yes, you need to pound it out, shoot a bunch of rounds, figure out a concept or a skill. That is absolutely going to be an element of your training. But then you need to have a piece that is very match biased. Like, how do I train myself how to learn a stage, strategize a stage, program a stage, that kind of thing, and then replicate a match scenario as much as possible to do that. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. No, I think that's really awesome. I mean, I've heard you talk about that before, and and you're right. It is kind of mind blowing to think I'm going to spend 6 hours at the range and I'm going to fire 100 rounds or something close to that. And like you do the math, it's like, well, that's like not even 20 rounds an hour,
Yeah.
like that. And to some people that probably would not sound very fun. And I know a lot of people's motivation in going to the range is, at least in part, to have some fun. But you got guys like you that are one of the best limited division shooters in the country, as is recently proven, and maybe other guys that are really dependent on carrying their gun for personal defense. Like, it's great when training is fun, but for some of us, there is fun in pursuit of excellence, which
Absolutely
means a lot of times doing work, because it takes work to get good.
There's a whole bunch of embracing the suck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So
Absolutely.
like we can use, like, Riley and I had an opportunity to do some live fire training together. And this is like every once in a while, like, actually we have a good opportunity here in on the Front Range of Colorado, where there's a lot of practical shooting matches, USPSA matches and whatnot to attend. And every once in a while there's a weekend day where there isn't a match. And that happened this past weekend. And like when that happens, I like to gather up some friends and like kind of make a mini match and have like 6 or 8 guys get together and go out and quote unquote practice. And we'll set up a full size field course stage that we would do, and have there's always a purpose to this stage. It's not just a random stage, at least in my mind. Like, I want to have elements that have kicked my butt from matches I've attended or known things that I have issues with, and I'll put those elements in this stage. And then we'll set up the stage in a manner and that we can use it in multiple different manners, like either start in the back and shoot to the front, or start in the front and shoot to the back, that kind of thing. And when I go to these practice scenarios, they're actually a unique subset of my match training, where I purposefully limit my physical rehearsals of the stage. Like, I force myself to not physically walk or mimic the sections of the stage. to replicate scenarios that I experience in major matches when there's just too many bodies on a stage to do that. Like some competitors require like complete full physical access to a stage. Nobody else is on it, so they can run around and try everything out and try everything 10 different times. And for some people, if that's what you need to succeed in your strategy and your program, great. But there's a lot of times when you attend major events where you just don't have that opportunity. So I use this training scenario to replicate that major match situation where there's too many people on the stage. I'm not going to have a lot of physical repetitions on the stage. So I'm going to 100% value my few physical repetitions, and then put all the homework into my visual, internal mental rehearsals of the stage, right? And my goal during these practice sessions is to be able to shoot the stage and have the same quote unquote performance or hit factor from the first run all the way to the last run. No matter how many iterations or times I shoot the stage, I want to be able to replicate that same performance over and over and over and over and over. And it's not a matter of me holding back my performance so I can perform consistently. I'm absolutely giving that performance every ounce of effort I can, but I don't want it to be a scenario where I need 3 or 4 or 5 iterations before I perform to a level I desire. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
And if you don't put yourself in that scenario on a regular basis, that's part of training. How do I perform cold? Right? You need to put yourself in that scenario very common. And another aspect of it that I really like about bringing out buddies to train with, and it replicates the same social interaction distraction that we all get exposed to at matches, because everybody's joking around and talking about their new blaster and, oh, did you see that? And you're ROing other competitors, right? So you're taking on tasks while you're doing that. It's not like you just get to sit back and let everybody do everything, right? And then, oh, now I'm up, now I can perform, because that's not realistic either, right? So you have to be able to build all of those distraction mitigation tools by replicating those scenarios in practice. And that's like, I don't tell many people that I practice with about that, like, what is my purpose in doing this? But that is the primary purpose of why I invite a good group of guys to come out and practice, because it replicates a match scenario very well. And it provides me an opportunity to not have that endless physical rehearsal of the stage, or the endless, let me just run it a gazillion times until I can figure it out. I have a very finite amount of times I can physically rehearse it or actually shoot it. And I think that is really where the rubber meets the road in building that skill of how do I perform cold.
Yeah, all good thoughts. One thing I was thinking about that would be maybe more applicable to the defensive-oriented individual would be, as far as, to start kind of drawing some correlations over to those folks. And by the way, I'm someone that considers myself in both realms. I'm very much, heck, I'm the host of the Concealed Carry podcast. Like, by golly, like, defensive shooting is important to me, but I also shoot competitively and enjoy that very much, and enjoy the thrill of trying to get better. But one thing I've talked about before, and there's even at least a video or two out there, like on our Concealed Carry YouTube channel, where I demonstrate some drills that are done cold, and I talk about doing them cold. And specifically, one of those that comes to mind is, and I'm going to take credit for it to some degree, because I know I'm the first one to ever put this out there publicly, for sure, because I scoured the interwebs to see if that was the case. And what that is what I refer to as the Jack Wilson drill, right? So everybody, or most everybody's familiar with the shooting at the church in northern Texas, the White Settlement, Texas church shooting, where Jack Wilson, our hero, from the back of this sanctuary or chapel, draws his SIG P229 and drops the guy with one shot to the head from like 15-ish yards away, right? Like, that was a phenomenal feat. phenomenal because Jack was totally cold. It came out of nowhere. He had very little warning. He had no warm up. And he had one shot to make it count because that guy had turned after shooting 2 other individuals and was turning and heading towards what is believed to be the pastor or the preacher or whoever was was leading the congregation at that point, right? Jack draws his 229, fires one shot, drops the threat. Okay. And so, I remember being inspired by seeing that and seeing the video that came out of that and thinking, let's put together a simple shooting test that, as best we can in a single drill, tests us on our ability to be able to do that. And when I create drills, a lot of times I like to make things as attainable or as easy to set up by just about anybody as possible. So I like working with easy to come up with targets, for instance. And so I was like, you know what? We're going to do a 3x5 card, which is close enough to a headshot, I think, in terms of a standard. We're going to do a 3x5 card at 15 yards. And my goal is, and I don't always do it every time now, but for about 8 or 9 months, every trip to the range, I shot that thing cold with my carry gun in my usual carry position with my carry ammo that my gun should be sighted in for, and would show up to the range, throw up my target, put up my 3x5 card, pace off 15 yards, and then shot timer. Beep, draw. See if I can get that one shot. And the par time is 3 seconds, and that's my general par time that I tell everybody they should at least try to strive for. My personal par time is I like to get that done in 2 seconds or less. Draw, headshot, 15 yards, under 2 seconds for sure, and be able to do that repeatedly. And that was my cold shooting drill I did every trip to the range for like 9 months. And I still pull it out every once in a while, like, hey, let's test myself on that again. I think that's a phenomenal standard to strive for because, I mean, that's intimidating for a lot of folks to look at that little 3x5 card 15 yards away and go, I'm going to hit that 9 times out of 10 every time I do this cold, having not touched my gun or not having not fired or practiced really for a week or 2 or 3 or however long it's been, and I'm going to drill that 3x5 card because that's what Jack had to do that day to save lives. Like that's, and I actually try to put myself in that position, like think to myself that this shot right here right now has to be accomplished, and if not, then something bad happens. And
Wait, so do you make something bad happen?
You could, and I know where you would go with that.
Yeah.
And I want to hear you throw that out there. But just for me personally, for a long, this was before I really knew you, and was familiar with one of your strategies for that. But I would just literally sit there and think, like, put myself in Jack Wilson's shoes. I'm sitting there or standing there in the congregation and like realizing that this is a do or die. When I do that drill, I don't, regardless of pass or fail, I don't do it again. Because at the very least, because I'll tell you, when you fail, you're like, man, like I'm going to do that again because I gotta accomplish it, right? Because nobody likes walking away from the range as a failure. But that's one drill I never repeat more than once. I never do more than once because if I fail, I want to think on that for like a week or 2 until my next opportunity, so it bugs me, and that just like creates even more pressure and anxiety surrounding that. But I'd like to hear your thought about some strategies, how we can create more pressure at the range.
Well, it's easy. It just comes in the penalties, right? So if you apply a personal penalty to failure, that is an actual penalty, not an oh shucks, whoops, that's too bad. It needs to be a tangible penalty to yourself, and people can do that in many different manners, right? Like one way that a lot of people that I've seen be successful is if you go to the range with a certain quantity of ammo and you're failing at a specific skill set and you keep failing at that thing and you're like, I want to fix it. Well, if you start to take away your ammunition, Like, so if you go to the range with, let's say, 200 rounds, and every time you fail at that thing, you take away 50 rounds, you have 4 chances to screw it up before you got to go home, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or, it could be a physical thing, right? So you could say, oh, if I miss this target, I have to do 25 burpees or run a lap around the range or do so many push-ups or whatever, right? You could do, apply penalties in many different manners, but I think that as adults, that most people consider, shooting at the range as a pleasurable thing to do, and I want to go out here and have fun. That's where they really leave out the embrace the suck factor, and part of the suck is having the proper penalty to apply when you do not succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Because when your only penalty is, darn it, I wish I didn't do that, let me try it again, that's not a penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
So if you apply that penalty methodology in whatever manner that motivates you, like for me, it's a 50-mile drive one way for me to the range to practice in live fire, right? So it's 1 hour each way in driving, right? So there's the time cost, there's the gas cost of that, then I've been out there a certain amount of hours, our time is worth some kind of money, right? And for me, that there was, I hate to say it, there was a lot of shortened training sessions because I set the proper penalty that, guess what, you don't get to play anymore when you fail enough times, right? And as your skills improve, that penalty needs to increase as well to scale, right? You got to scale the penalties along with your skill set, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a great drill that you're talking about. Whatever motivates you to say, hey, let me measure my cold performance, and then if you tie a realistic and tangible penalty to that, then that's going to force that additional pressure that you need to perform.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I was just thinking that I can imagine one very extreme way you could approach it is you could go to the range, and every time you're like, I start my practice session by shooting the Jack Wilson drill. If I pass it, I get to continue practicing today. If I fail it, I turn around and I go home. And
Mm-hmm.
and you go home and like you fired one round and you're
Yep.
done. Like that
And you
would
got
definitely
to
drive.
bookend that, right? You got to bookend it, right? So it's not only just hit the target; it's also hit the target within a certain time.
Yeah, yes,
Right?
of
So
course.
you can't say, "Oh, well, now I'm just going to take 10 years to hit this thing, and I'll hit it for sure, so I can practice the rest of the day."
Yep.
Right?
Well, that's why Jack Wilson drill has a part-time standard, man. Yeah. And like I say,
Yeah.
like when I'm talking to the general public, I say, and part of that's because that's about how long Jack Wilson had to make his shot. And part of it is because I think it's a bit more realistic for most shooters. But I'm always all about creating a standard for you individually as a shooter that's appropriate for you as a shooter. So for the general public, I say a 3-second par time. Okay, on that drill. For myself, I try to achieve 100% performance with a 2-second part time, and I'm usually around 1.75 seconds, like 1.7 to 1.8, somewhere in that ballpark. I could push that even lower, and like make sure I get that shot in 1.5, seconds on that 3x5 card at 15 yards. And I know there's some shooters that could push it probably well beyond that are even more skilled than I am. But like for me, I've taken it to a level where it's an acceptable standard, in my opinion. That's a reasonable, real world worthy standard. But anyway, just something I thought about. And then another common thing I've done in practices is that I've started with the Jack Wilson drill. So when you complete that, you've only fired one shot. You're still basically cold. Like I don't call that a warm up at all. And then I can create a number of other drills that maybe are more commonly used or familiar to defensive or by the defensive community, shooting community, uh, and run a couple of those while you're still generally cold. And I still think that there's a lot of value in doing that and applying some of the strategies like what you even talked about here today. Even taking advantage of some dry fire practice at the range, I think all has huge benefits to it. Some examples would be run the Jack Wilson for one shot, maybe turning around and doing a the very first drill in my class standards is a draw to 2 shots. And I like that as opposed to just draw to 1 shot at 7 yards on an A zone, because 2 shots means that you have to keep yourself honest. Like, you don't just get lucky with it. You don't just draw and throw a shot at the A zone and, oh, I got it. Cool, I got 1. Because if your grip sucks, you might get 1, but you rarely will get lucky with 2, right? So that's why I like draw to 2 shots a little bit more than draw to 1 shot. And so, my new cold standard would be basically something like that. Would be, I might do the Jack Wilson, and then do my draw to 2 shot standard, and then do an actual build drill, which is 6 shots at 7 yards, and then do my transition standard and my throttle control standard. And through all of that, I will have fired no more than 25 rounds, which is not a lot. And I can work through each of those in a deliberate manner and really test and evaluate myself in my cold performance capability. In the first 30 to 45 minutes on the range. I don't know. Any further thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, beyond that, I mean, I think that the more you can simulate like a realistic scenario, the better, right? Like if you're, training, you want to test your concealed carry first shot out of the gun skill, I would replicate a very similar scenario, right? Like you're getting out of your car, and as soon as you get out of your car, you have to shoot something, right? And that, something like that, like instead of, oh, let me set up this target and let me pace it off and let me get I'm getting ready to do this and this is my one time, like you don't get that opportunity in real life, right?
True. Yep.
So, I mean,
it
to me, it's all about, replicating what you're tasked with performing in practice, right? And I think a lot of people get distracted around the actual shooting part. And they think that just because the gun is going boom, that equals training, which for a lot of the stuff that we need to do, like gun manipulation stuff or moving around a stage or cover effectively and that kind of stuff, that you don't even need a gun in your hands to do that thing, right?
Yeah.
So,
very good.
I mean, another strategy like that I like to use from a competitive perspective is that I really don't treat individual matches as a separate event. Like people, like I went to the nationals, that was quote unquote a nationals event. And that was 18 stages, separate stages of you had to shoot in that one match. I kind of consider my quote unquote nationals as the whole year of stages, right? And in that, using that mentality of not only using matches I attend, each stage within each one of those matches as a huge combined match, I also integrate all of those practice sessions that I do, that I try to replicate that match performance into that, to always have, like, there's really not, for me, there's not a scenario where this match is more important than the other, or this practice is less important than this match. It is all important to me, and they are all worth the same quote unquote value. Like it's not like I'm never going to go into, oh, this is a club match, I can screw around and not pay attention.
Right.
If I breed that skill of not paying attention, then now I'm manufacturing a distraction of just the simple decision is, does this match matter or does it not? Right? Versus all the matches matter. And since all the matches matter, it's all just one big match, right? And maybe I could say it like I've been playing USPSA since 2008. I've been shooting a, what is that, 12, 13-year match, right?
I like that.
And that, I think for you, like thinking about like being able to come out of the gate on the first stage, hitting on all cylinders, maybe thinking about it from that perspective will help you.
Yeah. No, I like that. I will say I've been getting better at that, first stage performance. and some of it's been because of conversations you and I have had about not trying to treat stages or matches differently. Just, I mean, I'm the big time sandbagger because I like throw away
Mm-hmm.
more classifiers than I probably should.
Well,
Because for a long time it was
you just
like,
don't have the opportunity to shoot as many matches as a lot of other people. I think
that's
that
true.
in itself, right?
That's true. That's true.
Because you're busy working.
And so I've put more emphasis on those matches where I know I'm going to shoot a classifier because I'm like, yes, it's an opportunity to level up. And I've actually I've stopped thinking about classifiers almost entirely. Like at this point, I actually don't care. Like people come and like, hey, so when are you gonna make Grandmaster? I'm like, at this point, I don't know. Because there was a time where I was like, I'm gonna make Grandmaster this year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then what happened was I was putting a lot of emphasis and pressure on myself to do well at every classifier and was over trying on those classifiers
Yeah.
and then throwing those out and then nothing's counting. And then I'm not, getting, shooting the scores I need to shoot to actually, make a difference towards classification. And so now I'm like, you know what? I don't even care. I'll keep being the sandbagger that I am, although it's not as bad being master class, but like when it happens, it happens. Like I no longer have a specific goal of I'm going to make Grandmaster by whatever time frame. Like
Well,
it
if you just stay on the mentality of I want to always assess and improve performance, then your classification will follow as
yeah,
needed, right? So if you're always striving to improve your performance and do things more efficiently and effectively, then
yeah,
and you absolutely start treating classifier stages as just any other stage, then it's going to end up what it is,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah. And
so
I agree. And I would say generally my attitude is that as far as like historically, my match performance has always been probably more biased towards like being better at like where I finish in a match than what my classification would sometimes suggest. And I think that's because like I just was always trying to do just always trying to do my best regardless of what the match was. But um but I think in the back of my mind there was always this subtle like I got to make GM. I got to make GM. Because I got guys like Tim Herron even, and Scott Jedlinski. They're like, man, I'm like you should be GM already, kind of thing. It's like, come on, shut your trap. Like, let me just focus and do my thing. Stop putting that. Don't be putting that evil on me, Ricky Bobby. Like just and so yeah, like at this point, like I don't even worry about what my classification is. I don't remember the last time I looked at my classification or what my actual percentage was. As far as I could tell you, my percentage could have gone down and I wouldn't know. I know I'm M class, but I have no idea what my percentage is. So I'm not thinking about it. I'm just focused on getting better at
yeah,
match performance.
that's a good way to look at it. Should we answer some of these questions that are in the comments?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we haven't had a ton, but we got a
Maybe that'll
couple now.
answer some of these.
So here's Elkie. Elkie, I think, is going to be one of the winners of a book because he's like one of the
Okay.
only guys asking questions.
So be it, man.
So, have you, Charlie? He's asking you. Have you ever competed with a Glock or Sig, and why or why not?
So I have not competed with a Glock or a Sig specifically, but from a plastic fantastic gun, I have competed with an XDM, Springfield XDM, and also a CZ P10F. I've shot both of those platforms in competition shooting and that kind of thing. And the platform that you end up using in competition is really kind of predicated around the performance of the firearm. And some of it's like, as long as it's reliable and accurate and that kind of stuff, it's really not the arrow. It's always the Indian getting the job done. But on the I choose to shoot the limited division, which is high capacity magazines, usually double stacked 1911s or 2011s. And predominantly, I choose to shoot those because the array of options and tuning options for those firearms is very extensive. So if I want to put any kind of size or height or dimensions of sights on that gun, I can get those, springs or guide rods or weights of this or magwells or any kind of permutation of tuning that tool to fit me better. That's the primary reason why I choose that tool for my competition in Denver. And I wouldn't say that, like, there's been plenty of evidence of high top level shooters shooting Glocks or Sigs or any of those plastic, based guns at a very high competitive level and the world arena and doing really good with that. So it's not a matter of one gun is better than the other. I would say that the reliable and functional guns are going to be the things that you want to pick. And since we're all humans and we're unique in our hands and our arms and our strength is all different, you absolutely need to have a platform that you're using that you can tune to you, right?
Yep. Yeah, totally can understand that. And I know you're huge with that. Like you talk about things at a level, uh, and your expectations of your equipment is at a level that is definitely beyond mine. And that, I mean, you spend a lot more time uh, tinkering with the tuning of your guns than I have, certainly. So,
Yeah,
and I
I mean, that
respect that.
to me, that's part of the enjoyment of the hobby is
Hmm.
figuring out what components and features and functions do.
Hmm.
Like, what do they do? Is this better? Is it worse? Is
Hmm.
a lighter thing make performance better, or does a
Yeah.
heavier thing, or whatever? Right.
Yeah.
I like that part of it.
Well, it's like this last Saturday when we were at the range together, and you, I mean, you're on Team Atlas, so you're running, really nice double stack, uh, 1911 style pistol, and you pulled out your gun at one point, and I think it was your 41st, and you did basically like a double, like a double tap, if folks want to think of it
Hmm.
that way. What was that? Probably about 20 yards, 18 yards.
I think it was 17.
Okay, so 17 yards,
Yep.
and you pulled out your gun and whack whack, two like probably like 16 splits probably.
Yeah, I think it was
Um,
around that.
was pretty spicy at that distance, and look at the target and like they're pretty close to each other, and then you pulled out was it a 9 millimeter that you were
No,
comparing,
it's
or was that
so
also a 40?
it's also a 40, but the difference between those two different guns is, like, one is a kind of a standard style of a build where
Hmm.
the slide and the barrel are separate, where the second gun is we call it a sight block style
Oh.
gun, where
Hmm.
the sight is actually on top of the barrel and there's a block on the front of the barrel. There's
Yep.
not a comp out there, but it's just really what it is, just weight. So there's
Hmm.
more weight in the barrel versus the other gun,
Hmm. Yeah.
but they're
So
both set up
would
basically the same.
would you mind sharing kind of like what was it specifically that you were looking for from an analytical perspective between those two guns as you fired them side by side?
So that for me, we all have different grip pressures on the gun, right? Just how we grip it and mechanics against the recoil. Like, we can't stop the recoil from happening. There's always going to be a certain amount of muzzle flip, but we can absolutely tune how does the muzzle return when the slide closes again. And for me, not that I want to rely on double tapping at stuff. Like, I
Right.
want to see separate sight pictures and fire each shot as a separate event, but I don't want to have a scenario where, let's say that the recoil spring is too heavy and that causes the muzzle to dip as the slide snaps back forward. I don't want to have to wait for that dip event to be over before I can fire the next shot. So that was a test. And realistically, before, I had a 10-pound recoil spring in there. And that day I was testing a 9-pound recoil spring and
Mm.
seeing if I could. And the 10-pound recoil spring replicated almost the same amount of muzzle return, but it had a little bit less muzzle rise because there's less spring, effort you're fighting against when the slide comes back and
Mhm.
cycles. So, and like there's a lot of people who think, like, oh, there's a magical spring, or what's this, common, like, tell me your exact setup, and I'll tell people my exact setup as far as springs and all that stuff. But you're not gripping my gun.
Mm-hmm.
right? Right.
Yeah.
I'm not gripping your gun. So you need to go through those effort of tuning your stuff to you, just as I'm going through that effort of tuning the stuff to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very cool. Very cool. Cool. All right. So there's a couple other questions here.
Yeah.
Let's see. Also from Elkie Monroe, he says, how do you and he corrected in a follow-up comment. Wait, he wasn't saying burger, he was saying urge. How do you control the urge to go faster when shooting a stage in competition?
Ooh. Yeah. So that controlling the urge to go faster, that's a kind of an aspect of trying
Mm-hmm.
instead of just letting the process happen. So the way I like to think about it is that I afford myself the opportunity to try or manufacture a performance in training. So I want to try to make a better part time, or I want to try to shoot this distance of target faster. I want to try to perform better. But in a match scenario, there's no latitude for trying. All I can do is default back to what I know I can do and what I'm confident in deploying. Because at the start of the discussion, I was talking about distractions, right? I don't want to manufacture a distraction by thinking to myself, oh, these targets are really close. I'm going to try to shoot them really fast. That always is going to result in a worse performance than just letting the shooting happen at whatever pace it wants to happen. And people will sometimes misconstrue that as, well, if I just let it happen, it's just going to happen in a lackadaisical manner. Well, that means that, guess what? In your practice, when you quote unquote let it happen, you're not pushing the aggression, right? So you should always be pushing the boundaries of aggression. And if you don't have that slight tickle of, this is at almost at my limit of performance, and that not feel normal, then guess what? You got to put a lot more effort in your practice to practice in that zone or that mode where you're almost at that mode of what some people may say out of control,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just be below that out of control aggression level should be quote unquote normal, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, if a race car driver that they go around the track and the track demands to be competitive that you drive 200 miles an hour, right? You have to make driving 200 miles an hour normal, and that means that in your practice, guess what? You got to drive 250 miles an hour, because that's going to that when you pull it rein it in to only 200 miles an hour, that is going to feel normal, but that's also going to be competitive. Does it
Mm-hmm.
make sense?
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
sure it does.
hopefully the
Absolutely.
other part of it is that a lot of people's performances, they feel like they have a schedule in their head, like this thing should be happening at this predetermined schedule. Well, our desired schedule versus reality, that's super important that those two different things align, right? And that's when we're talking about the dry firing, either physically or mentally. We need to dry fire the stage or the performance at a realistic pace. Because let's say that a stage takes 10 seconds to shoot physically, if I dry fire that physically or mentally and it's a 7-second performance, then is when I do live fire that thing, when I get a couple seconds into that performance, I'm going to have that feeling of I'm behind schedule, because yes, I'm behind schedule of my visualization or expectation that this should be a 7-second stage, but it's turning out to be a 10-second stage.
Mm.
So whenever I'm dry firing a stage, mentally or physically, I try to make that stuff as realistic as possible from a physical perspective, right? I'm not going to like just randomly point over to target, not even pretend like I'm trying to see a sight picture or not, just point my hand at a target and go, boom. Like, for a lot of targets, that's not reality,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of targets, we point over at it and we go, boom, boom. That is reality. So for a
Yeah.
lot of my students, in my classes that I do, like I tell them, I want to hear your boom booms when you're dry firing the stage, so I can assess their validity around realistic performance in drive practice.
Mm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's it's kind of like I liken it to the journey that Luke Skywalker goes through in his quest to become a Jedi. And he's working with Yoda and Obi-Wan, and like they're trying to give him all this wisdom and stuff and like, but I always come down to that scene with Yoda and Luke struggling to be able to utilize and control the Force, and he's just like, do or do not. There is no try, and like that's become like a phrase I repeat to myself a lot now. At a match, especially at my matches, especially like practice is the place where I try. I absolutely try in practices, but at a match, it's like, no, I have to either do or do not. I cannot try here. I just have to trust in all the stuff I have practiced up to this point. I have to just let it happen. And if I try, then I will over try and I'll get my own way and I'll end up like Luke, where I'm like trying to do headstands and balance things and, in midair and all whatever, and then everything's just going to fall and collapse and I'm going to fall over and stuff like, it's not going to work out. So like, you have to just let it happen. And it's for some people listening to this right now, they're probably like, I don't get it. Like, because but it's one of those things is you experience it and as you experiment with that mental attitude, like you'll start making some breakthroughs. So at least that's what I think.
Yeah. So what's this next
question from CT Cowboys on YouTube. So that's a fun when we have the YouTube watchers, we get some interesting names sometimes. We don't know who they are sometimes, but CT here says, and I don't know how to respond to this question myself, because the part of me is like, I don't know if I agree with what he's asking with the premise of this question. But here's what his question is: why do most of the experienced shooters make new shooters feel so unwelcome, even if they are willing to learn?
So maybe that reaction is that in most of the competition events that I've been to, like especially sanctioned events by USPSA or Steel Challenge or IDPA or whatever, we have all of these sanctioning bodies have very, very stringent safety rules, right? And the safety rules are multi-layered from a perspective of you have to break multiple safety rules before anybody actually gets hurt, right? So you have to do something like super bad, multiple failures in the same time before anybody quote unquote gets shot, right? Or something bad could happen. And when newer shooters they come into that environment, I can see them construing that as not being welcomed because their quote unquote normal gun handling is not acceptable in this competitive environment, gun handling requirement, right? So I've absolutely seen like super nice people normally give newer shooters or any shooters the riot act when they see others doing unsafe stuff, right? And to me, I look at that from a perspective of, hey, we all want to go home with the same amount of holes we came with, right?
Yep.
And if that means that we're policing each other, and largely in all these competitive practical shooting sports, it's a volunteer sport, so we're officiating ourselves. It's all based on the honor system around are we adhering to the rules and whatnot. So everybody is responsible from the safety perspective. So I can see from that perspective, from a safety scenario, where if somebody is wanting to do unsafe stuff and that's just normal to them, and then the competitive shooters find that unacceptable, I can see that happening. The other factor that maybe you see is that competitive anything attracts A-type personalities, right? And A-type personalities usually have big egos, right? And they, that bravado or that I'm better than you and let me show you how to do this and you don't know how to do anything, that's part of that kind of personality that it's attracted to, not just the shooting sports, but pretty much any competitive sport, right? So there's always that factor of it, right? And I kind of look at it as like we're all adults. right? And if you feel that someone's abusing you on the range verbally or emotionally, call them out. Be like, hey, dude, quit acting like a jackhole, right?
Mm-hmm.
And ask, what am I doing wrong? Like, am I doing something wrong that's against the rules? Well, if not, then beat it. Like, I don't want to hear about it,
Yeah.
right? So maybe that's
Yeah.
the answer. I don't know.
Yeah. My general experience with, especially with the competitive shooting communities, is by and large, people are incredibly helpful. That's been my experience since the get go. I remember showing up at my very first 3-gun match, which was at your same gun club run by Mike out there, and I had to just trust somebody that said, "Hey, just show up, because if you don't have some equipment that you need, like we'll take care of you." Like that's
Somebody will have it.
I heard that, and I was like, "Well, I don't have a shot shell carrier, to put shot shells on my belt or whatever." And I was like, "Well, I guess I'm just going to go and see if somebody will actually lend me one."
Hmm.
And I showed up, and because I pretty much had everything else. I had a belt and holster and pouches for my pistol and rifle mags, but I didn't have any way to carry shotgun shells, and thought I was going to be doing it from the pocket. And show up and talk to Mike, the match director, and you're the match director of your own match. I just found Mike and said, "Hey, Mike, I'm new. I have no idea what I'm doing." And he's like, "Oh, great, glad to have you. Uh, you know, let me know what you need, kind of thing. You have any questions?" And I was like, "Well, actually, I have no idea how to carry shot shells with me. I don't have a carrier or anything like that." And he's like, "Oh, great. I'll set you up with one." And a few minutes later, he comes over with one and lends me one, or actually, it might have been from another competitor. I don't remember exactly. And I've seen that very same thing play out again and again and again at many matches. So I think part of my response to CT Cowboys on YouTube here would be that I think mostly people are very kind and welcoming in the shooting sports, but there are always exceptions, and there are always bad apples, and there are always, and I do hear about those stories too. I have a friend that went to his first USPSA match and had a very negative experience. That was mostly because of an individual that was present and was doing a lot of the ROing, and their attitude about it was not very helpful towards him as a new shooter. And so that does happen. And I would say try to have thick skin and understand that there are bad apples, and come back again and try to maybe interact with somebody else. And chances
Hmm.
are your next experience will go better.
Yep, that's cool. Great advice.
Cool. Connor asks, and we are kind of getting a little bit long in time here, but there's questions, so I'm going to go ahead and ask them as long as you're still good,
Yeah,
Charlie.
let's do it.
He asks, with respect to shooting cold, what's the easiest way for you to spot and correct or address issues you see within the first handful of rounds? Interesting question.
So I think that a lot of the failures that we have when the gun's going boom can be directly tied back to the things that we're not doing in dry fire. Like a very common mistake that I see people make, and when a lot of people consider dry fire, it's almost exclusively gun handling stuff, like draws and reloads and those kind of things. Well, if we're gripping the gun with the proper amount of pressure to manage recoil, transition between targets effectively, that kind of stuff, we really can't grip that hard for a long duration, right? So one of the things I ask my students is like, hey, tell me what your dry fire, program is, your schedule is, and they're like, oh yeah, well I dry fire draws for like a half hour and then do reloads for an hour, and I'm like, wow, like just from a beat up your appendage perspective, if you have the right amount of hand speed and aggression, if I want to slap down to a magazine and do an aggressive reload, I got about 15 in me before I'm bruising my hand and getting bloody knuckles and stuff, because you need that level of hand aggression to do that. So the people that have this excessive frequency of draws or reloads and that kind of handling stuff, that tells me that they don't have the right aggression in their movement, but more importantly, they're not using the proper amount of grip pressure when they're doing those things, right? So, and this is where, like, in my own arc of performance, I had to learn this lesson the hard way myself, where I was that guy doing a bunch of draws and a bunch of reloads, and I could do a bunch of it, and I'd go out, and when I'd live fire it, my live fire times would always be slower than my dry fire times. And I'm like, why is this? And in one aspect of it was that physical element of it, meaning I was not gripping the gun with the proper amount of pressure in dry fire, which meant now this is a manufactured distraction on when I'm in live fire. Now I have to grip the gun because it will recoil. And now that is a distraction because it's a decision I have to make after the buzzer goes off. I have to draw the gun, and now, yes, I have to grip hard now instead of I have to grip hard all of the time. So one of the fixes that I had for that is that I told myself, no matter what type of gun handling I'm doing, anytime I pick up a gun and I put it in my hand, I'm going to grip that thing like it's going to go off. So that's dry fire, cleaning the gun, checking it that it's safe, pulling it out of the range bag, checking it's safe, putting it in the safe. I grip that thing as if it could fire at any time. And guess what? It's no longer a choice, right? There's no choice of not gripping the gun with the proper pressure. So that's where, like, for a lot of people, if you feel like, oh, I can do a 1 second draw and dry fire, and then when I get into live fire, it's a 1.2 or a 1.3 or whatever, it's some higher time. A big element of that is the physical factor of it. The other part of it is that you're not respecting what is needed visually in the sights.
Yep.
Right. And for a lot of people, if they're dry firing in their house, especially with iron sights, the lighting conditions in your house are way worse than they are at the range. So, like, let's say that you are, like, if I wanted to do a draw in my house in this room right now, my draw's time to a valid sight picture is absolutely going to be slower than if I was out on the range in the middle of the day, simply because the lighting is worse. It takes me longer to find and acquire the sights in this lighting scenario. So if I'm trying to push, like, abnormally push and say, well, I know I can do a 1 second draw, I'm just going to set a par time on my shot timer and do a 1 second draw, regardless of what sight picture I see. Now I'm ingraining that bad habit of I don't have to see a sight picture before I pull the trigger, right? And all of those bad habits manifest when we get out on the range and we actually want to perform. And that's when we discover those things of, like, holy cow, I'm 3 or 4 shots in this mag and the gun is dancing around in my hand so much that it's all over the place. Well, because you don't grip the gun hard all the time.
Yep.
It's a good example of that. Or you have good fast hands gripping hard, but you didn't respect your sight picture in dry fire. And now when you go out in live fire, you can get the gun out of the holster and on target super fast, but you delay in shooting because now you have to actually see a sight picture to hit what you're shooting at, right? So a big part of this is practicing right to start off with and identifying those things, that what am I doing different in dry fire versus live fire, and that helps. The other part of it, like, of this question, is really you need recon or information to assess what you're doing, right? So I'll set up a tripod and I'll video myself practicing on the range when I'm there, and most importantly, I'm videoing my dry fire iterations of the stage, because if I can't figure it out directly by feeling and seeing what's happening, I'll go back to the video and I'll be able to pick it out and say, oh, that's what I'm doing physically wrong. I need to change that. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just put it up here on the screen too. Connor said that was a great answer. So I think it was helpful.
Yeah.
One more question from Connor, and I think we'll wrap it up there. He asks, when shooting competition or even training, how do you adjust to different round loads? In other words, from there, how do you adjust to hotter, say, carry rounds?
That's actually a good question, because I think that's one element that is absolutely different between competition shooting and, concealed carry or self-defense shooting, is that we don't have a wallet thick enough to shoot defense ammo exclusively in practice, right? That would be way too expensive. But you could manufacture a reload that mimics that same hot recoil impulse at the cheaper cost of reloaded components, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in my competition universe, like some people like to say, oh, well, this is my practice ammo and this is my match ammo, like that, and they apply different manufacturing or quality control process between these two different ammunitions. I found that to be a disaster because it would almost always be, oh, I ran out of match ammo, now I got to try to case gauge this ammo right away, or maybe I didn't reload it to the right, paying attention, squibs and that kind of thing. So I learned early on that there's no such thing as different ammos. All of my ammo is match ammunition, right? And if it doesn't meet my spec of match ammunition, I knock out the bullets and I reload it, right? I don't even go down the path of, well, this is the crappy ammo I'm going to do this one weird thing with. It's just not worth it to me. And since the division I normally shoot is limited division, and in USPSA we have power factors, major power factor and minor power factor, I shoot a 40 caliber 2011 style pistol, and the minimum power factor in that is 165, which with 180 grain bullets, that's going like 950 feet per second. So I shoot I because chronos are different across all of the whole country. I artificially make my ammo hotter than it really needs to be. That way, that is not a distraction where, oh, I'm super close to making power factor. Am I going to go minor? That kind of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
all of my ammunition is usually like 170 to 175 power factor, which is right at that self-defense load level, like power. So I'm shooting quote unquote hot ammo all the time. That way, when I pick up like a self-defense gun, like a self-defense 9mm or even a 45, it doesn't, like, the recoil impulse doesn't feel like, oh my god, that's crazy. Like it goes boom. I manage the recoil, and I hit what I'm shooting at.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way that I kind of make myself ammo power agnostic, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just make it all hot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's a lot easier when you're in a major power factor division. Me, I'm shooting minor carry optics, which can be a little bit different. I will say this much, that my 135, my current 135 grain loads uh, are not all that different in terms of how they recoil, I would say. And like they're, they're a lot weaker than what Charlie's shooting in limited major power factor, but there's certain defensive loads out there. Like, for instance, your standard pressure 147 grain Federal HST actually isn't that bad. It's actually pretty soft shooting. Um, but there's some guys that absolutely insist they got to carry, 124 grain plus Ps. That is going to be very different. And I don't know how to answer that one, as far as like, well, you know, buy a good stash and practice with your 124 grain plus Ps, or maybe, play around with some reloads or some major power factor stuff that maybe gets you closer to that. But one of the reasons why I carry a 147 grain, at least now, a 147 grain Federal HST, is it's close to my actual competition load, um, but it's still a reputable load that has a good track record for on the street performance. And the cool thing there too is that it's very, very, very close to the same ballistic trajectory as my match ammo as well. So I don't really have to change zero. If anything, it's like on my carry gun, and I leave it always zeroed into my carry ammo. And if I switch from my carry ammo, if I go from, or with my carry gun and I put my match ammo in there, it'll impact like an inch right and an inch low for whatever reason at 25 yards. And so it's like, you know what? I could deal with that. Again, that's with my carry gun. My match guns are obviously sighted in for my match ammo. And but anyway, that's kind of been my approach. It's not a perfect approach. I have experimented a little bit with loading a perfectly matched, at least as good as I can, reload that mimics my defensive load, and I've done that, and I've done that successfully. But it's too much effort to, like you were talking about, like having multiple reloads and having to manage that for like the same gun practically is kind of a pain in the butt. My press is set up right now for my match ammo, and for me to switch, to change grain weight or change powders, change even bullets, because now I've got a different, overall length that I'm loading to, or the bullet profile is different, and so that, like that's just pain I don't want to have to go through to switch, things around in my reloading world. So I got something that was close. So if I put my current match ammo it shoots very soft in my match gun, and when I put it in like my P365 XL, for instance, it feels not all that different from shooting standard pressure factory defensive loads. So into the question about plus P ammo, you don't have to run plus P ammo. There are standard pressure options out there that will give you all that you need performance wise. Just do the research and you'll be fine. So my take.
I mean, I kind of think that, like, I think that at least the people that I know that have their own specific carry ammo, I think that that carry ammo is in those guns way too long.
Oh, for sure.
Like
you should be shooting
that stuff up. You should be
mm-hmm.
chewing through that stuff as much as you can. And I think there's this, like, kind of this wives' tale that a lot of people have that, oh, I don't want to wear out my gun, or I don't want to wear it to the point where it's going to malfunction on me. I mean, the reality is that you can shoot a lot of these guns way more than people really expect, right? The life cycle of a lot, especially today, and all these manufacturing processes that are so improved, and the quality of materials, and all that stuff is so good these days that just shoot the stuff, right? Shoot it up, get used to it, especially if you're in a mode of, like, you're continually, like, chambering around and unchambering it every day, right? You're going to set back those bullets, and you're going to, like, for those, like, I've seen guys, like, they're like, oh, look at my carry gun, and their top bullet is so set back, and I tell them, like, dude, I would not shoot that. Like, that thing is going to blow up. And they're like, huh? Like, I don't understand. That's $1. I'm like, and I ask them, like, how much is your face worth? Is it worth more than $1? Okay, let's change that bullet out, right? Or how much is your hand worth? I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're spot on with that. I mean, and I've talked about it before on the podcast that I think rotating through your carry ammo once every 6 months, not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. Some guys could do more frequently. Some guys maybe a little less frequently. But that was my common
I mean,
practice.
In the big picture, like, think about it from a liability perspective.
Yeah.
Like, you can shoot a lot of ammo for the cost of litigation.
Oh, for sure.
Right. You could shoot a lot of ammo for the same amount of money you spend on going out to dinner, or even gas and driving to the range and back. Right. So I don't know.
Yep. For sure. So true. I mean, it's all about perspective, and people oftentimes lose sight of perspective in search of saving a nickel.
Mm-hmm.
So good thoughts. Well, awesome.
So
guys.
I've been looking at the comments. Should we announce who the winners are?
All right. So who are you going to pick, Charlie? Who's your two book recipients?
I think that I really don't think there was any bad questions, which was good. And so, I mean, I think we got to pick two good question winners, right? So I think it's going to be Elke, and it's going to be Connor.
All right.
So you guys, thank you very much for your questions, and hopefully we were able to provide some quality answers and knowledge for you guys on that. And if you can get your information to Riley, he will let me know your shipping information, and I'll get you some books out.
There you go. There you go. Excellent. We'll make that happen. So Elkie, I know, knows how to reach me, so I'll have him, send me a message. And Connor, we'll connect as well. I'll make sure we do. Congratulations, you guys, and thanks everyone for being a part of this episode with us. I hope you got some little nuggets and words of wisdom from this episode with Charlie that hopefully you can take home or take to the practice range and utilize to do better in achieving your best cold performance, whether you're trying to shoot and do well at your next match, or if, heaven forbid, next week, next month, next year, you got to draw your gun in self-defense. I sincerely hope and wish you all are able to make those shots count and get the job done, because there's no second chances. So with that, Charlie, again, your website is bigpandaperformance.com. Anything else you want to say as far as letting everyone or leaving everybody with the good word, or anything you want to say as far as where they can find you, or anything you got coming up, whether it's classes, whatever?
No, it's if you want to reach out and get more information about my training offerings or order my book, it's all on my website, bigpandaperformance.com. And I really appreciate, Riley, your time having, participating in this, and let me join your unofficial, official co-hosting, entertainment device, whatever you want to call it. And hopefully I'll have an opportunity again in the future to do it. And if you guys have any questions, reach out, ask them, that kind of stuff. Right.
Awesome. And we do appreciate your time and for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. So with that, we are going to let you guys go. Have a great rest of your day, wherever you may be, and be safe out there. And don't forget to train right, train often, and train safe, so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true.